32. The inscription of the origin. This detour was necessary for recapturing the function of the concept of articulation. It broaches language, it opens speech as institution born of passion, but it threatens song as original speech. It pulls language toward need and reason accomplices and therefore lends itself to ideal more easily. The more articulated a language is, the less accentuated it is, the more rational it is, the less musical it is, and the less it loses by being written, the better it expresses need. It becomes Nordic. Rousseau wants us to think of this movement as an accident. He describes it, however, in its originary necessity. This unhappy accident is also a natural progress. It does not come unexpectedly upon a constituted song, nor does it surprise a full music. Before articulation, therefore, we now know, there is no speech, no song, and thus no music. Passion could not be expressed or imitated without articulation. The cry of nature, second discourse, the simple sounds that emerge naturally from the throat, Essay 4, do not make a language because articulation has not yet played there. Natural sounds are inarticulate, Essay 4. Convention has its hold only upon articulation, which pulls language out of the cry, and increases itself with consonants, tenses, and quantity. Thus language is born out of the process of its own degeneration. That is why, in order to convey Rousseau's descriptive procedure, which does not wish to restore the facts but merely to measure a deviation, it is perhaps imprudent to call by the name of 0 degree or simple origin that out of which the deviation is measured or the structure outlined. 0 degree or origin implies that the commencement be simple, that it not be at the same time the beginning of a degeneration, that it be possible to think it in the form of presence in general, whether it be a modified presence or not, whether it be past event or permanent essence. To speak of simple origin, it must also be possible to measure deviation according to a simple axis and in a single direction. Is it still necessary to recall that nothing in Rousseau's description authorizes us to do so? To speak of origin and 0 degree in fact comments on Rousseau's declared intention, and it corrects on that point more than one classical or hasty reading. But in spite of that declared intention, Rousseau's discourse lets itself be constrained by a complexity which always has the form of the supplement of or from the origin. His declared intention is not annulled by this but rather inscribed within a system which it no longer dominates. The desire for the origin becomes an indispensable and indestructible function situated within a syntax without origin. Rousseau would like to separate originarity from supplementarity. All the rights constituted by our logos are on his side. It is unthinkable and intolerable that what has the name origin should be no more than a point situated within the system of supplementarity. The latter in fact wrenches language from its condition of origin, from its conditional or its future of origin, from that which it must, ought to, have been and what it has never been. It could only have been born by suspending its relation to all origin. Its history is that of the supplement of, from, origin, of the originary substitute and the substitute of the origin. Let us observe the play of the tenses and modes at the end of chapter 4, which describes the ideal of the language of origin. Since natural sounds are inarticulate, words would have few articulations. Interposing some consonants to fill the gaps between vowels would suffice to make them fluid and easy to pronounce. On the other hand, the sounds would be very varied, and the diversity of accents for each sound would further multiply them. Quantity and rhythm would account for still further combinations. Since sounds, accents, and number, which are natural, would leave little to articulation, which is conventional, it would be sung rather than spoken. Most of the root words would be imitative sounds or accents of passion, or effects of sense objects. It would contain many onomatopoeic expressions. This language would have many synonyms for expressing the same thing according to various relationships. Asterisk, it would have few adverbs and abstract names for expressing these same relationships. It would have many augmentatives, diminutives, composite words, expletive particles to indicate the cadence of sentences and fullness of phrases. It would have many irregularities and anomalies. It would deem phasized grammatical analogy for euphony, number, harmony, and beauty of sounds. Instead of arguments, it would have aphorisms. It would persuade without convincing, and would represent without reasoning. Follows the customary extrinsic or archaeological reference. It would resemble Chinese in certain respects, Greek, and Arabic in others. If you understand these ideas in all their ramifications, you will find that Plato's Critylus is not as ridiculous as it appears to be. Italics added, pp 1516. The stage thus described in the conditional is already that of a language that has broken with gesture, need, animality, etc. But of a language that has not yet been corrupted by articulation, convention, supplementarity. The time of that language is the unstable, inaccessible, mythic limit between that already and this not yet, time of a language being born, just as there was a time for society being born. Neither before nor after the origin. After having observed this play of the temporal mode, let us continue with our reading. The chapter on script follows immediately. The title alone separates the quotation above from the one following. I stress the sense of certain verbs and the mode of all the verbs. Anyone who studies the history and progress of the tongues will see that the more the words become monotonous, the more the consonants multiply, that, as accents fall into disuse and quantities are neutralized, they are replaced subtly by grammatical combinations and new articulations. But only the pressure of time brings these changes about. To the degree that needs multiply, that affairs become complicated, that light is shed, knowledge is increased, language changes its character. It becomes more regular and less passionate. It substitutes ideas for feelings. It no longer speaks to the heart but to reason. For that very reason, accent diminishes, articulation increases. Language becomes more exact and clearer, but more prolix, duller, and colder. This progression seems to me entirely natural. P016. Thus supplementarity makes possible all that constitutes the property of man, speech, society, passion, etc. But what is this property of man? On the one hand, it is that of which the possibility must be thought before man, and outside of him. Man allows himself to be announced to himself after the fact of supplementarity, which is thus not an attribute accidental or essential of man. For on the other hand, supplementarity, which is nothing, neither a presence nor an absence, is neither a substance nor an essence of man. It is precisely the play of presence and absence, the opening of this play that no metaphysical or ontological concept can comprehend. Therefore this property of man is not a property of man, it is the very dislocation of the proper in general, it is the dislocation of the characteristic, the proper in general, the impossibility and therefore the desire of self-proximity, the impossibility and therefore the desire of pure presence. That supplementarity is not a characteristic or property of man does not mean only, and in an equally radical manner, that it is not a characteristic or property, but also that its play precedes what one calls man and extends outside of him. Man calls himself man only by drawing limits excluding his other from the play of supplementarity, the purity of nature, of animality, primitivism, childhood, madness, divinity. The approach to these limits is at once feared as a threat of death, and desired as access to a life without difference. The history of man calling himself man is the articulation of all these limits among themselves. All concepts determining a non-supplementarity, nature, animality, primitivism, childhood, madness, divinity, etc., have evidently no truth value. They belong, moreover, with the idea of truth itself to an epoch of supplementary writing. They have meaning only within a closure of the game. Writing will appear to us more and more as another name for the structure of supplementary writing. If one takes into account that, according to Rousseau himself, articulation makes possible both speech and writing, a language is necessarily articulated, and the more articulated it is, the more it lends itself to writing, one should be assured of what Saussure hesitated to say in what we know of the anagrams, namely, that there are no phonemes before the grapheme. That is, before that which operates as a principle of death within speech. Perhaps now one will better grasp the situation of Rousseau's discourse with reference to this concept of the supplement, and by the same token, the status of the analysis that I am attempting here. It does not suffice to say that Rousseau thinks the supplement without thinking it, that he does not match his saying and his meaning, his descriptions and his declarations. One must still organize this separation and this contradiction. Rousseau uses the word and describes the thing. But now we know that what concerns us here belongs neither to word nor to thing. Word and thing are referential limits that only the supplementary structure can produce and mark. Using the word and describing the thing, Rousseau in a way displaces and deforms the sign supplement, the unity of the signifier and the signified, as it is articulated among nouns, supplement, substitute supplement, subaligned, verbs, to supply, to be substituted superior, se substituer, etc., and adjectives, supplementary, suppletory supplement air, suppletive, and makes the signifieds play on the register of plus or minus. But these displacements and deformations are regulated by the contradictory unity itself supplementary of a desire. As in the dream, as Freud analyzes it, incompatibles are simultaneously admitted as soon as it is a matter of satisfying a desire, in spite of the principle of identity, or of the excluded third party, the logical time of consciousness. Using a word other than dream, inaugurating a conceptuality which would no longer belong to the metaphysics of presence or consciousness, opposing wakefulness and dream even within Freud's discourse, it would be necessary to define a space in which this regulated contradiction has been possible and can be described. What is called history of ideas would have to begin by disengaging this space before articulating its field in terms of other fields. These are, of course, questions that can only be asked. What are the two contradictory possibilities that Rousseau wishes to retain simultaneously? And how does he do it? He wishes on the one hand to affirm, by giving it a positive value, everything of which articulation is the principle or everything with which it constructs a system, passion, language, society, man, etc. But he intends to affirm simultaneously all that is cancelled by articulation, accent, fait, energy, passion yet again, and so on. The supplement being the articulated structure of these two possibilities, Rousseau can only decompose them and dissociate them into two simple units, logically contradictory yet allowing an intact purity to both the negative and the positive. And yet Rousseau, caught, like the logic of identity, within the graphic of supplementarity, says what he does not wish to say, describes what he does not wish to conclude, that the positive is the negative, life is death, presence is absence, and that this repetitive supplementarity is not comprised in any dialectic, at least if that concept is governed, as it always has been, by a horizon of presence. Moreover, Rousseau is not alone in being caught in the graphic of supplementarity. All meaning and therefore all discourse is caught there, particularly, and by a singular tum, the discourse of the metaphysics within which Rousseau's concepts move. And when Hegel will proclaim the unity of absence and presence, of non-being and being, dialectics or history will continue to be, at least on the level of discourse that we have called Rousseau's wishing to say, a movement of mediation between two full presences. Eschatological parousia is also the presence of the full speech, bringing together all its differences and its articulations within the consciousness, of, self of the logos. Consequently, before asking the necessary questions about the historical situation of Rousseau's text, we must locate all the signs of its appurtenance to the metaphysics of presence, from Plato to Hegel, rhythmed by the articulation of presence upon self-presence. The unity of this metaphysical tradition should be respected in its general permanence through all the marks of appurtenance, the genealogical sequences, the stricter roots of causality that organize Rousseau's text. We must recognize, prudently and as a preliminary, what this historicity amounts to. Without this, what one would inscribe within a narrower structure would not be a text, and above all not Rousseau's text. It does not suffice to understand Rousseau's text within that implication of the epochs of metaphysics or of the West, what I only diffidently sketch here. We must also know that this history of metaphysics, to which the concept of history itself returns, belongs to an ensemble for which the name history is no longer suitable. All this interplay of implications is so complex that it would be more than imprudent to wish to assure oneself as to how much of it is proper to a text revient and proper a untext, for example, Rousseau's. That is not only difficult, it is in fact impossible. The question which one professes to answer here has undoubtedly no meaning outside of the metaphysics of presence, of the proper J and of the subject. There is not, strictly speaking, a text whose author or subject is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. From this principal proposition, it remains to draw the rigorous consequences, without confusing all the subordinate propositions under the pretext that their meaning and their limits are already contested at their root.